It's the 4th of July. Flags are waving, fireworks are lighting up the sky, families are gathering, and everywhere we look, we're reminded of one word: freedom. We celebrate the freedom to worship, the freedom to speak, the freedom to dream, the freedom to build a life that matters. But here's the question I want to ask you today. What if you're living in a free country, but you don't feel free? Hi, friends. Welcome to Taking Back Happy. I'm your host, Gina Granville, God's girl, retired homeschool mom of 4, empty nester, GG, essential oil and exercise enthusiast, Christian life coach, and someone who is taking back her own happy. I know many of you feel exactly like me in these midlife years, a sort of loss of direction, but you feel way too young and vibrant to sit on the porch and just watch life go by. What if you could reclaim your life, finding deep joy, renewed passion and purpose, and plenty of adventure in these midlife years? If you are ready to find your spark again, throw on those walking shoes, pop in those earbuds, and join me right here as we take back happy together. Hey, Taking Back Happy friends. Part of taking back your happy is finding a community of like-minded women who are doing the same thing. So I want to invite you into the Taking Back Happy Facebook group. It's a great place to get encouragement, connect with other women, and grow your happy. Another way we can connect is to become a TBH Insider. When you become a TBH Insider, you get free weekly emails with the latest podcast, tips on creating a happy mindset, early bird access to special offers, and encouraging Bible devos. If you want to go even deeper, hit me up and I'll give you the details on the free one-on-one life coaching call. Okay, my friends, every 4th of July, we celebrate the freedoms we have as Americans. We celebrate the freedom to worship, to speak, to gather together, to pursue the lives that we've been given. But today, I want to ask a different question. What if you're politically free, but you're personally imprisoned? What if no one is holding you captive except the thoughts that you've believed, the stories that you've repeated, or the fears that you've handed control to? As women in midlife, we have more freedom than we often realize. We may not control every circumstance, but we always have more choices than we think. So I have a few questions for you today. The first one is, what if freedom begins in your mind? So many of us believe our emotions are caused by our circumstances, but they're not. 2 women can walk through the exact same divorce. One becomes bitter, one becomes stronger. 2 women become empty nesters. One feels abandoned, the other one discovers her purpose. The circumstances didn't create the emotion. The thought about the circumstances did. It's kind of funny because when I became an empty nester, I really struggled with it. I even struggled with it a couple years before it became a reality. And so I kind of had it in my mind like, oh man, this is just so hard. This is just devastating. This is overwhelming. And I kind of felt like every single woman felt the same way. But come to find out, that's not the truth at all. I met my friend Donna, and she had a totally different take on it. She had more like an excitement when her kids graduated and moved on and she became an empty nester. And she had like this kind of like, wow, my job is done. I did what I set out to do. And now they're grown adults and they're living their best life. And just more a feeling of accomplishment rather than a feeling of despair. And I don't know if you heard the podcast when I had her on, but it was so encouraging and it was so good for me to see it from a different point of view, because I just had the woe is me point of view and she had the wow, this is awesome point of view. So that just reminds me that it's not necessarily the circumstance. It's more how we think about it, what we believe about that circumstance. Romans 12:2 says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In this case, we can actually renew our mind and be choosing freedom at the exact same time, because we're choosing that freedom that begins in our mind with our thoughts. This brings me to my next question. Do you have the freedom to choose your thoughts? You can't always stop that first thought. That first thought just kind of pops in your head, but you can absolutely decide whether you're going to let it have a seat at the table. That thought pops right in, but that choice follows closely behind. So some examples might be, I'm too old. It's too late. Nobody needs me anymore. Or even something like, I miss God's plan. But let's ask ourselves, is that actually true? Or have I simply just repeated that time after time after time until I kind of believe it's true? It feels true. What if we changed up some of those thoughts and maybe even looked for a little evidence to back up what we were thinking and what we were saying? So instead of saying, I'm too old, what if we said, I'm definitely not too old? And then we remembered the fact that Colonel Sanders started Kentucky Fried Chicken when he was in his 70s. If he's in his 70s and I'm in my 50s, then, that's a big difference, right? That's still, man, I'm a spring chicken at this point, right? Or what if we were saying, oh man, it's just too late for me. But then we looked at our neighbor was doing something pretty cool and we're like, wow, it's not too late for her. Maybe if it's not too late for her, it's not too late for me. So once we kind of change that thought, we can start looking for evidence to back that up. Years ago, when I was selling Young Living as a full-time business, I was in like a program with some other ladies that were doing the same thing. And they were talking a lot about this, kind of like this mindset, investigating the mindset and how you had to think about things and how you grow your business based on that. And so they were talking about, our thoughts create our feelings that create our actions and things like that. And I thought I really had a handle on it. One day I was talking about a family member and I said, this person doesn't support me because XYZ. And someone said, that's not a fact. That is a thought. And I was like, no, it's a fact. And they're like, can you prove it in a court of law? And I was like, well, no, because I don't really know what that person thinks. I just know what my perception is of what I think that person thinks. And in all honesty, I could think this person doesn't support me. And then I could look for evidence to back that up. Or I could think this person does support me. And I could look for evidence to back that up. So that was literally just a thought. So if we agree that freedom begins in your mind, and we also agree that you have the freedom to choose your own thoughts, here comes my question number 3. What if your thoughts create your feelings? This is one of the biggest mindset shifts. It's not that that certain event or that certain circumstance caused us to feel a certain way. It's that that event caused a thought. We had a thought about it, and then it caused us to feel a certain way. So when you change the thought, you can often change the feeling. So like my scenario before when I was like, oh, this person doesn't support me, it was like I had that thought in my mind and it made me feel whatever it made me feel. It made me feel upset or it made me feel rejected or it made me feel sad. But as soon as I could change that thought to, well, maybe that person does support me, but it's just not the way that I thought they would or whatever, and I started seeing it in a different way and like, well, they do support me because they do buy the products that I sell and things like that. And all of a sudden I could have a whole different feeling about it instead of that sad and dejected feeling. So here's my 4th question. Do your feelings influence your actions? For instance, when I believe, oh man, I'm never going to find my partner, or there's no good men in this world anymore, I'm not going to find someone to get married to. What happens when you believe that? When oh, there's no good men, what do? Well, you don't find a good man. Let's put it that way. You stay stuck, right? So when you believe, God still has good plans for me, what's the next thing that you do? Well, you're going to take a next step, right? You're going to like, wow, God still has good plans for me. I'm going to take this next right step, whatever it might be. If you think about it, it's the same woman. It's a different thought. It produces a different feeling. And literally, she has a different life. Because freedom begins in our mind, right? Because we get to choose the thoughts that we have, because our thoughts create our feelings. And because those feelings influence our actions, right? It's like it's if you give a mouse a cookie thing, this happens and then this happens and this happens. But it all starts with that freedom in our mind. So let's think about where this freedom can take us next. Freedom means taking responsibility. It isn't about blame. It's literally about ownership. You can't always choose like what happened or like what people say, what people think. You can't choose your past, any of those things. But you can choose your perspective. You can choose your response, how you react to them. You can choose your next right step. And that, my friends, is freedom. 2 Corinthians 3:17 says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And that just makes me think that Jesus didn't just come to give us like eternal freedom or even external freedom. He came to give us that internal freedom, that freedom, in our mind, that freedom from fear, that freedom to choose, that freedom from shame, that freedom from condemnation, that freedom from even like believing lies and getting wrapped around the spindle with different things we think someone thinks about us. So I have a little practical challenge for you. This week, every time that you catch yourself saying, I have to, or even thinking it in your mind, I have to, I want you to pause. And I want you to ask yourself instead, do I really? Or do I get to choose? Because so much of our life changes when we remember that the choice is still ours. We have that freedom. So here's a few examples. I have to be miserable. I have to stay angry. I have to worry. I have to compare myself to others. I have to let my past define me. And then that's when you ask that question, do you really? Or do you get to choose? You do have choices. You do not have to take those previous things that you've believed, those previous things that you've thought over and over again, kind of like on a replay. You don't have to accept those. You get to decide. So my Taken Back Happy friends, I hope you had an amazing Independence Day. I hope it was a big 250th birthday and it was a great celebration. But I also hope that you remember that the greatest freedom isn't just the one that our nation celebrates. It's the freedom that God gives us every day. So if you live in a country that doesn't have the kind of freedoms that we celebrate every day, it doesn't matter. You still have that freedom that God has given you. You still have that freedom to renew your mind. You have the freedom to reject lies. You have the freedom to choose hope over fear. You have the freedom to take one courageous step toward the life that He's calling us to live. No matter what your past looks like, no matter what season you're in, you don't have to stay stuck, because taking back happy begins by taking back the freedom God has already given to us. So I want you to think about one more thing too, is freedom is actually that space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. God has given us everything we need for life and godliness. So we get to decide, we get to choose, and we have that beautiful freedom to do so. So let's celebrate, my friends. If this podcast blessed and encouraged you today, I'd love for you to share it with your friends. You can take a screenshot and share it in your stories, but make sure you tag me at Gina Granville so we can connect. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Make sure you join my Taken Back Happy Facebook group. I'll meet you back here soon, and we'll continue taking back happy together.